Welcome back to The Belonging Place, where we talk about community and connection and belonging. And I'm really excited to have our guest, Jake, here. And Jake's going to talk a little bit about himself. But one of the reasons why I really wanted to connect with Jake and have him on the podcast is we have some things we really believe in common. He's going to talk a little bit about writing, and I have a passion for writing and journaling and all kinds of things. And he's also a coach. I just love the people helping people grow concept in any capacity. Obviously, I'm a therapist. I also do some coaching, and more, right? You're pretty active on LinkedIn as far as the culture of just sharing good and doing good, which I also love and a big fan of. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. I love being here. We just met a few minutes ago.
Yes. Yeah.
We knew each other online, and been a couple months that we've kind of talked back and forth, or a couple weeks rather.
Yeah.
But thanks for having me on. This is great.
So to start off, just tell us a little bit about who you are, and
Sure.
Yeah.
I just told you this. I've listened to several episodes of the podcast so far, and this is by far, and I think everybody has the same reaction. They don't know how to answer this question, because a lot of podcasts have an introduction.
Yes.
They read a bio, something like that.
And mostly I just want people to give me what I call their elevator pitch.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Elevator pitch.
And the reason why, just so you know, you're the first person who's actually brought that up.
Sure.
Is I can tell people who you are, but you do a better job of picking what you want to share on this podcast.
For sure.
Does that make sense?
And I love that approach, because I can feel as I've listened to your episodes, people squirm a little bit, because they give the elevator pitch, and then you dig deeper. You're like, okay, forget all that, and now tell me not what you do, but who you are. And I'm like, oh no, now I'm nervous to share my story, but I'm also super excited.
Yeah.
So, I'm a lot of things. And so I would say, generally speaking, I'm a little bit on the introverted side.
Okay.
I'm a father. I'm a husband. Recently, I've become a writer.
Okay.
That's something I've never done. I'm 39 years old. Probably the first 30 plus years of my life, maybe more, was not my thing. In high school, hated English, always gravitated towards math and the sciences. That's why I became an engineer.
Yeah.
Very technically minded, but writing is a passion of mine, as you mentioned, and it's been something that's been great for me. And that's journaling, kind of reflective writing, but it's also for something like books and those kinds of things. I wrote a children's book. I have a copy here that I brought for you. So it's been a newfound passion. It surprises me every time.
Yeah.
It's something that's difficult too. It's not something that I would say comes naturally.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to write. And I think that's true for most people that actually write. But it's something that I love.
Hard for writers that love to write, and even are coached and or educated. Also, even more difficult for people who sort of feel called to it, but that don't necessarily have the skills or the passion. They're
Sure.
I just probably should do this. Yeah, I'm often working. I don't talk about this a lot, but I do editing and helping people write biographies and help people write books, because the process of writing is just hard.
It's overwhelming. It's a mountain to climb. First, you got to figure out what you're going to write about. Then there's the fear of sharing that with people, right?
And then there's a how, because some
the editing
people
and the how and the
are
everything.
writing nonfiction, but some people are writing fiction, and then there's point of view, and then there's your audience, and then there's
You have to learn all the skills. Yep, it's hard.
I love it. Okay, so you're doing a lot of things. I'm glad you talked to us a little bit about being an engineer. The engineer introverted math science thing is kind of, people get I think people get put in sort of pigeonholed into this
box,
is this kind of person, right? And you're gonna talk a little bit about coaching, which I'm really excited about, because this is interesting in this world, right?
Sure.
I think we accept coaching in diet and exercise and in entrepreneurship and in goal-oriented. I am excited, and we're going to pause just for a second before you go to that to talk about somebody who's an engineer coaching engineers.
Mm-hmm.
This process seems not as organic and natural. Maybe I'm just wrong about that, but I want to talk.
Oh, you're
this
right.
is exciting to me
You're
that
right.
you have specified.
Yeah.
But before we get to your like you already know this because you've listened. A lot of people haven't heard podcast episodes before, so you already know I'm going to ask this question. So
Sure.
the question I'm going to ask you is, Jake, if you don't have the things,
Sure.
if you don't have like what I've done and what I have, if you strip that all away, like then who would you say you are?
And this is why I was nervous, because I knew you were going to ask this. And I know your response is always there's no right answer. It's
No right
just,
answer.
you know, what do you feel? What do you think? I'm somebody that's constantly learning and super curious. I think those would be my two like defining features. And I think that's changed over time. I think I've always been that way, but it's been a little bit more amplified in the recent years. And that used to scare me. Like the curiosity used to scare me, because it's like, well, for example, in my career, I've spent 10 or 15 years of my career. If you include college, it's almost 20, right?
Yeah.
And I've had this mindset shift to do other things, like to write and to coach and to do some other things. And that's scary, because it feels like letting go of an identity, right? Of who you were or
And
who
kind
you
of a
are.
solid path.
And a solid,
Engineering
very
is like
linear path. Yes, it's very
and
linear.
creativity and coaching is
It's
like
embracing the
entrepreneurial, and it
unknown.
is.
Yep.
I mean, they couldn't be.
They are almost complete opposites. And what I've learned in my own life is that, and this is no knock on engineering in the career or anything like that. I love it. I absolutely love it.
And it's needed.
And it's needed.
Yeah.
But I've found that there are certain voids that I've had in my life personally and also professionally that I think things that we value are created in vacuums or in voids. So things that we're missing that we really want that we don't have. And one of those things was creativity for me.
Okay.
So I felt incredibly not creative in my profession.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I don't understand why, but for some reason I was drawn to that. Maybe it's the lack of that creativity that I had. There's this kind of controlled creativity that happens, is what I call it, in the workplace sometimes, where a lot of engineers pride themselves on creating something from nothing. Like I'm a structural engineer.
Yeah.
And so there's an empty piece of land, and at some point there's a building that gets built.
Yes.
And so it wasn't there before, and you were part of that process of creating something from nothing.
That will last probably
that will last
long
forever.
Past you, right?
Yes, it'll last so long.
This is the thing I want to shout out that I'm glad you already got to about structural engineers in particular, is there's got to be something so gratifying as far as like, I'm kind of always talking a little bit about progeny or legacy, or from a person who's single that like values that maybe more than other people do, because I don't have a partner and I don't have kids. This seems to be the way that we usually have legacy or progeny, right? So I'm often looking and seeing things from a different perspective about, and I have thought about this, like, man, people who build buildings or any capacity, the architecture, the building structural designer, the person, that thing is going to stand, especially nowadays, the way we build things, it's going to stand so long after we have died, right? People will see. Now, you might not be associated to that, but that's still like, that's wild, right? Like,
it is wild.
And that's different than putting and investing in a person, right? So when we look at like I love what you just said. I'm curious. I'm going to ask you this question.
Sure.
Do you think that part of the nervousness about trying new things is that one of your core values is, or one of the things you just described yourself as is curious, and curiosity brings connection, which brings people, which brings social, which brings this interaction. And I'm curious if part of your, I don't know if you know what I'm asking the question, but for extroverts that get curious, it's not really scary for them to just like get in the world and do the thing, right? But for introverts, I wonder, like, does part of the nervousness or part of the putting myself out there equal like more exposure, more people, more, I don't know.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there. There's a saying that you reminded me of. It's curiosity killed the cat.
Yes.
We all know the saying, right? And I looked into this, and I have a weekly newsletter I wrote about this because I was again curious, and I'm like, man, such a horrible lesson to teach people. Like, don't be curious because there's danger involved there. And the reality is there is danger, or there's uncomfortableness. But I looked into it. There's an older version of that phrase, curiosity killed the cat. And it's curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back.
that last part is
Isn't that good?
bad that it's missing.
Isn't it bad that it's missing? And we all know that cats, we say this, they don't actually have 9 lives, but we say cats have 9 lives. And so if we look at ourselves that way, as like we can go and fail and do the thing and mess up and make mistakes, and it's going to be okay because we have another chance.
Yes.
Right? And you get satisfaction from being curious.
Yes.
And so as an introvert, like you were kind of mentioning, I think we buy into the first part of that phrase way too much.
Yes.
We're like, I want to be curious, but there's all these reasons, right? That I'm going to get burned, or I'm going to suffer, or it's going to be painful, or it's uncomfortable. Introverts do not like being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's something I've had.
Or I'm going to have to hold space for a bunch of people that I don't want to like.
And those things can be draining as an introverted person. I always tell people in the real world, I'm an introvert. Within the engineering world, I'm more of an extrovert.
Oh, there you go.
Because most engineers are kind of quiet and keep to themselves and whatnot. And they wouldn't come on a show like this or write a book or do any of these things. And so I'm grateful for the fact that I think I've heard the term ambivert. Have you heard that before?
That's me.
And so that's probably where I lie a little bit.
You're probably an introvert that can sometimes act like an extrovert. And I am an extrovert that mostly is an introvert, which shocks people because my personality seems much more extroverted.
It does,
but at my core, I do not my battery does not get filled in a group of social people.
Well, that's why you like to write.
One-on-one. This is why I'm a writer. I'm a musician. I play the piano.
Exactly.
I'm a singer-songwriter. So this, like, not even in a band, right? I love one-on-one conversations. That's the podcast, right? We get to dig in. My like friends, I usually don't have like lots of group gatherings because I like to sit with them across the table or on my couch, like one-on-one. And they also really, really value that, right? But most people would say, I like, oh man, you're so extroverted. And sometimes I think that's energy versus like how you receive energy. 100%. I put off a lot of like high energy, but the way I receive energy isn't necessarily that way. And I also am a little bit repelled. Like when I get to see myself mirrored in somebody or something, like when they have the same energy as me, I'm a little bit like, ooh.
That's so funny.
And it is a mirror to me to be like, oh my gosh, Kylee, just calm it down. Like, lower the lights or whatever, like dim the thing, not dim myself, but dim the energy because it might be too much. And so when people reflect that back to me, it's a good reminder to me to like check it. Like, don't not be yourself, but like, same thing with people who I think are really introverted. It's like, can you turn it on a little bit? Can you come on a podcast? Can you do the thing? Because the message sometimes is more important than the messenger, right? And their ability to like show up and do things. So I do think we can change a little bit. Like you said, you're a little bit more on the extroverted side of the engineers, right? I think each of our places, our belonging places, each of our workplaces, I think we can show up authentically based on our role in that. I think part of the problem is if we don't, right? Like there's this idea in life that like you have to be a chameleon and that if you're a chameleon, then you're not really yourself. And I kind of kick against that because I kind of see a need to show up differently as the thing and as the people like present themselves, right? I'm still myself at a core, but how I interact in that group or how I contribute to that group changes the dynamic of that group. So being able to do both, right? Yeah. And a big part of that is curiosity, coming back to that, like seeking to understand and kind of being like where we are. And speaking of that, this is where I want to come and ask you, like speaking of being curious, you have been in engineering, you went to school, you're doing the thing. And somewhere along the line, you decided, hey, I think I have something I can give back to engineers. Yeah. And I think there's something that I can pull out of this maybe day to day or what people perceive as sort of this very static, and maybe I can add some dynamic. And so talk to me about that. Not just like what you do as a coach, but how you got there and why.
I love the open-ended questions. They're so open-ended and it's great because it allows me to kind of think through my thoughts. And so, like you said, engineering is kind of, it's kind of like saying I'm an introvert. I don't want to just paint this picture of it. Engineering is one thing. Right. It can be dynamic. It's a great career. There's a lot of people that love it. I also have grateful for my roots, my schooling, the people that I learned from and some of the mentors.
Where'd you go? Let's give a shout out.
So I went to, My path is long. I 4-year degree took me 8 years.
Okay.
So I went to a community college first.
Okay.
Then I came to BYU where I met my wife.
Okay.
We're both from the same hometown back in California. So we're like, what are we doing in Utah?
It's
And
such a
we
small
actually went to the
world in a
same
big
high
school.
school, right?
Okay.
But we're a few years apart, so we didn't go at the same time. So I ended up finishing my degree at Fresno State.
Okay.
But I found civil engineering at BYU, so I'll forever have a special place in my heart for BYU and the program there. Wrapped up at Fresno State, again, 8 years. Switched majors several times.
Doesn't matter how you get there.
But it was always math or mechanical engineering, civil, structural. It was always like in that, realm of what I wanted to do.
Which I'm just going to say, I want to come back to this, but
Sure.
I just want to say, as a creative music, dance, theater, writer, therapist, this could not be more like, I am always intrigued. Somebody told me years ago, like, Kylee, marry an engineer. Like, they are smart and consistent, and they usually, like, everyone, when I was going to school, was like, marry a dentist because they make good money and they have a flexible schedule. This was the thing, right? A couple of my friends married engineers, and they were just like, if you can find an engineer, they're just the best. They're consistent. They have good money. They always have a job. Anyway, this was the funny thing. But when you're sitting there talking about this is always fascinating to me as like a full blown, like, can't do math or science, but like in my brain, I had this belief about myself that, like, I cannot do this, that there are people in the world, and I have some really good friends that, like, this by choice. This is the world that they swim in. I just want to say thank you, because I'm old enough now in my life that when I was younger, I was like, who needs to know math and science? And like, what is that about? But I'm old enough now that I have been a recipient of the contributions, like, in a big way, of scientists and mathematicians and structural and civil engineers. I've been able to, like, sort of at my older, I think that's what we do. We gain wisdom to be able to look around the world and be like, man, it's so good that we have STEM and we have creative arts. Like, they have to both exist. Anyway, that's my little soapbox. So back to your math, science, 8 years.
So it was great. I loved my college experience. I kind of fumbled through it to figure out what my degree was going to be. And then close to graduating, I figured I should get an internship. So I did an internship back in my hometown, Fresno, worked there for almost a decade.
Okay.
And then about 10 to 12 years into my professional experience, the only way I can sum it up, and this is very vague, but I think resonates with a lot of people, is I was wanting more.
Okay. Yeah.
I decided to look for a new job, but I loved the people I worked with. I made decent money. I was fine with what I made, and I loved the work that I did. And those for me were the 3 North Stars, right?
Yes.
Like, if I can check these boxes, I'm fine. But what I found was, even though those boxes were checked, I was like, man, is this it?
Growth and purpose are boxes most people don't check.
I know.
That they kind of need, right?
We need it. And so I kind of did a lot of reflection, journaling, daily reflective writing. It sounds cliche. It sounds cheesy, but that's where it starts, right?
I don't think so, but I might be biased.
Well,
sounds amazing.
People that have done it agree with us, right? People that haven't done it are like, whatever,
It's like externalizing your internal voice in your head. And if you don't have a really good dialogue that goes inside your head, which some people don't, then putting it down and looking at it is, I'm biased also because therapy is basically that, right?
Sure.
You get in a room with somebody who doesn't have any bias to you, and you start throwing things out at them, or like I say, throw the spaghetti on the wall, and they can reflect holes that you can't see because of how I think writing can do this in a way that it's going to be exposing in ways that you can't think in your normal day-to-day thinking, right?
Yeah, for me, it was exactly what you just said. I'd gone a decade into this career, and I was happy in a lot of the normal senses, but I was also missing something, and I described that as more, but I didn't know what that more was. And so I turned to journaling and writing and these things. And I have to have a shout out to Ryan Holiday. He's one of my favorite people. You know Ryan Holiday. He writes about stoicism. He's an author. He's a bit of a celebrity. I got to meet him at one point on a computer screen, but I got to chat with him for a few minutes. He has this quote, and I'll try not to butcher it, about journaling. He says, "This is what the best journals look like. They're not for the reader. They're for the writer to slow the mind down and to wage peace with oneself.
Oof.
And I love that idea of waging peace, because we think of waging war, right, is kind of the normal terminology we use. And inside, there's all this like turmoil, internal struggle going on with me when I have 4 wonderful children and a wonderful wife and a beautiful career with people I love, making decent money and doing work that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And yet inside, I'm like, what's happening, right? And so I was able to use journaling and writing as a tool to wage peace with myself.
Oh,
right?
I love this.
And so I kind of figured out that my more was, you kind of alluded to this, in the engineering space, it's awesome because you get to see the built world take shape, right? You see a building go up and it's forever there. And I love showing my kids driving by things that I was a part of and go, look, I helped in a small part with this structure, this
visual,
building.
it's very logical.
Visual. The problem is it's not a person.
Yeah.
And I know those buildings have an impact on people, right? I just finished wrapping up a job. It's a behavioral health facility out in Taylorsville for Intermountain Health.
Nice.
And I know that's going to be a great benefit to the community. But there's this kind of detachment of like, I don't get to see that benefit because I'm just the engineer. I'm the guy on the computer doing the calculations, submitting the plans to the city. It's creative in that sense, but there's not this human connection that's being had. Again, it's a huge benefit to the community. It's just, I don't get to selfishly kind of be part of that.
Yeah.
And so for me, the more that I was looking for was kind of this human connection.
Got it.
And so that's where I turned to, well, how can I use my strengths as an engineer to help people? And it took a while to figure that out. It took a few years. But now I'm in a good spot where I get to coach engineers. And the reason I love that is because, like I said, I'm a little bit more of an extroverted engineer type.
Yes.
But I also speak their language. Like they're my people, right? And so they understand me and I understand them. And so that's kind of my long story summed up short.
This is the thing that, so I follow a therapist who is speaking to therapists on Instagram, which is very different than therapists.
Correct. Yeah.
Or very different than like, even like psychologists, even people that are just their audience is the average person, right? They're speaking from a place of authority. It's fascinating to follow a therapist who is speaking to therapists. It's a very different audience. It's a very different vulnerability. It's a very different like unprofessional, I guess. Like when I say that, I don't mean like there's anything crazy happening, but I mean, think about like the different way you show up. If you're teaching people about therapeutic things that don't have degrees, you have to break it down. I call it, you have to Brene Brown it. You have to take a big concept and you have to take it into chunks and you have to deliver it to people at a level that this is why they love her, right? Like I also love her, but those people who have studied, I'm also a social worker, I've studied what she studied, and she would say this too, given an opportunity. She's not talking about anything crazy new. She's not talking about anything like life shattering, I don't think, but she talks about it in a way that's like, I always say she gives people bite size, like she talks about vulnerability in a way that everybody can understand it. She talks about standing in the ring, which is like so amorphous, but she like talks about it in a way that you can get it and also like that you just want to be in the ring, you know? And so I think that like there's something to be said about being able to speak the language to the people. When I looked you up and saw that you didn't just coach generally, that you were coaching fairly specifically to other engineers, I was like, I love this. And so tell me a little bit more about that. You did say that like I speak their language, but what was it about your colleagues and people around you that you want to specifically sit down, spend time, coach them, write a newsletter? Like,
So for me, it's tough because you have these ideas, these thoughts. You're like, maybe if I'm struggling with these things, other people are struggling with these things. And so what that takes is a little bit of vulnerability to kind of speak up and share. And you know, you're kind of expecting people to go like, thanks, but no thanks. You know what I mean? Or like, you're the odd one.
That's
like you're the
you.
exception. Yeah, it's just you. And there are quite a few people that say that no matter what you do. Like it's not their thing, you know, and they're fine.
Or they're not ready.
Or they're not.
I
That's
always
true.
want to say,
that's
not
true.
the right timing.
That's true.
Yeah.
So maybe it's timing. Maybe they're just different and that's fine. Maybe they fit more of the introverted, you know, engineer role or whatever it is. And they want to stay in their lane and there's no problem with that. But when you start kind of voicing some of these things, putting them online, talking about stuff that I'm interested in my own personal growth and journey, And then other people are like, ooh, tell me more,
Yes.
Then you're like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And so that's how the journey started. I wrote an article in a magazine, a structural engineering magazine. Every article in there is highly technical, and mine was the only non-technical one.
Okay.
And so I reached out with just an idea before I even wrote the article. And I said, I'd love to write about personal development, and some of these concepts, some of these things I've been through, curiosity, creativity, writing. And they said yes. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So I did that. I spoke at a conference this year. It was a couple months ago, called the Structural Engineers Association of Utah.
Okay.
Again, there's probably 20 people that come and speak at highly technical PhD level type things. They're doing case studies on famous buildings around the world, huge earthquakes that recently happened, kind of the aftermath of that, and how we can improve our profession, our career.
Is so nerdy awesome.
So nerdy.
But I literally need to say nerdy awesome, because you start to say this like this is no big deal, and my brain is exploding with, like, I kind of have these love affairs with like tech companies, and like I don't have the skill set, but I just like, you start to talk about it and my brain goes like, what is that about? And I know that they're rebuilding the like Salt Lake Temple, which a lot of people know that aren't even LDS, and they're making it, and everyone knows that they're making it earthquake proof, but it's like, what does that mean? Does that mean it can just like, it can do the hula, kind of? Like,
yeah. So ironically, a guy was there that spoke. He was from the church.
I need to say, I'm sorry if that is offensive. I don't mean to really say, can it do the hula? But I mean, in my mind, does it mean that it can dance?
So like in a Brene Brown way, to boil it down, it's designed to do the hula, right? Okay. Like that's what
popped out of my mouth.
So there was a guy that came from the church. He was, I think, a geotechnical engineer, works for the church. So the biggest problem with that building is the foundations, is what they're trying to reinforce.
They had to like dig all around the sides and go way down, right?
So the idea is that in a giant earthquake, the earth moves.
Yes.
And the building ultimately stays still because it's on these things called base isolators.
Okay.
And so without getting too nerdy into it.
No, I love it. Keep going.
This guy talked about that, and me sitting there, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. Like, tell me more. And obviously it's a group of 400 structural engineers in the room wanting to eat this stuff up, and obviously to learn and to implement this stuff on some of the projects that we're doing ourselves. But what I found missing to that was, go back 1 year prior, I went to this conference, same conference, and although I loved it, I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, it's so high level, and most of it was unapplicable. You catch yourself yawning. It's just after lunch. It's really hard. You're like,
if they set it up in a way that everyone's sort of just preaching at you rather than learning.
There's no interaction. The being in person element, there was no benefit to that. It's like, just send me the slides, right? And I can just watch this. So my curiosity, the way I think, is like, I could speak at this.
Oh,
and I'd never done that before. Yeah. And I'm like, but what would I speak about? And I was like, I don't know, I'll speak. So before I'd even decided what I was going to speak about, I started telling people, I'm going to try to speak at that thing. And I made it a goal. I love this,
speak it out into the world.
I know, manifest it, whatever you want to call it. But I was like, I'm going to try. I'm going to do it. It was, I'm going to try.
Try and speak, yeah.
I'm going to see if somebody would let me speak. So I came up with this whole thing, again, non-technical, but it was geared to engineers. And I pitched it, you give in an abstract and a bio and that kind of thing, and it's 200 words. So they don't know what you're going to speak on for an hour. They just have an idea.
Yeah, basic framework.
And they were like, the committee was like, yeah, let's do it. We need some of these non-technical things. It's 90% technical, highly technical, but let's have somebody come.
So like, if we, in entrepreneurial words, we would be like, or just basic business words, we like tech, like hard skills and soft skills.
Sure.
We need some more soft skills in the room.
And I'll be the first to admit, engineers are lacking, generally speaking, stereotypically speaking, we don't have the people skills or the soft skills. There's no classes on that.
And they're not necessary, right?
They're not at the beginning of your career. When you get about a decade in, you start being more client facing.
And then yes.
So now you're doing business development, you're working on getting new clients, and you got to interact with people.
This is surgeons, and then they have to go and get money.
Exactly.
Or they have to whatever, right? Like people that sort of have a certain personality or a certain type that sort of are so good at the skill that they do, it's sort of this is why they picked this field, right? And then their job like sort of changes, and the way you look at it, and a lot of times it's from a sales perspective.
Correct.
I have to get money, or I have to do this, or I have to interface with a community where we're going to build the building, right? And then you don't have those. This is very interesting.
So you take off the technical hat most of the time later in your career, and you put on kind of the people person, communicator, going to the ribbon cutting ceremony, those kinds of things, where most engineers shy away from that, to be honest. And that's fine. You need the workhorses that can just do the engineering. And there's a place for people like that in the engineering world. But I was opened up to this whole other game of like, oh, there is a people side to what we do. And
this and is what we call it.
Right? I like that instead of either or, right? And so I love that. And so that was my trajectory for a little bit. I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy into this business side of engineering because I like the people aspect. And I love that. And I still try to do that. I do engineer 4 days a week, and then I coach 1 day a week. And I hope to kind of shift that as time goes, right? To do a little more coaching and a little less engineering. But when I do engineer, I love the people side of things more than I do the technical side. So,
and I do want to add, because there's a lot of people that are like trying to figure this out. There's a lot more coaching than we've ever had.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more people who are feeling like I have to stay where I'm at because of the employment environment, right? And I can't speak for everywhere, but in Utah, we have had over the last couple of years just a consistent laying off and rehiring. Like the good news is, I think we try, at least in our LinkedIn and our Silicon Slopes world here in Utah, we have tried and conspired. I've watched over and over people help other people get rehired when they've been laid off. So we have sort of this innate desire to like conspire for people's good. I just love watching that. But because of this, I think there's people that would want to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, but like the steady is like, I got to pay the bills. I got to help my family. And part of what I love about what you just said, and part of what I try to help people, both as a therapist and both as a coach and just as a person, tell people is like, figure out this and like what you just said. It's okay if you need to like keep your real job. And even if you don't love your real job, if your job is paying the bills and gives you the stability, it is hard for people to then think, well, then I'm going to carve out of my non-work hours time for me to do my creative work in addition to my family and in addition to other things. And I think initially that's really hard for people. What most people realize, like the jar, when you put the things you care about the most in the big pieces and then you add, is that you become a better father or a better mother or a better, when you can also develop some of these entrepreneurial or passion driven or what I call purposeful, because I think sometimes we think purpose has to come from my family, or it has to come from my religion, or it has to come from my job. And for some people, they can have all that. You described that earlier. I kind of had it all. It was okay. But in the okayness, there seemed to be a little bit of like purpose or creativity or growth, because there's something to be said about doing something and doing it well, but you're not growing. Like you're not hitting a growth edge. You're not being challenged, right? And I just want to say to the world, you don't have to have one or the other. It's not like all or nothing thinking. You don't have to like jump all the way in, you know? Lots of people I have a small private practice and I'm a full-time therapist, right? I coach on the side and stuff. And one helps me pay the bills and the other helps me help people in the way that I want, give me some flexibility. I like this idea of you saying, like, I think most people who coach and have a full-time job would like to maybe like tip it a little more because there's more freedom and usually more money in the like coaching side. But there is something to be said about the benefits and the stability and the coworkers and the structure, right? And that like, I feel to say like, I love what you're doing. And I'm saying like more people, I just want to give more permission to people to start something while you're in something and just tip your foot in it and like see how, touch your toe in it, see what it's going. You know, you're going to find pretty quickly, like if there's a big interest, and even if there's a big interest, you don't have to necessarily drop this thing and run to this thing, right? Just like add a little more and then figure it out. And eventually if you're like, okay, I think I can do this other thing. I have the structure. For me, sometimes it's about my executive function skills, my ability to like do the whole thing by myself. Knowing myself was like, I kind of like the stability of like, I get a paycheck and I don't have to find my own clients and I have colleagues and people that I can talk to. And until that changes for me, I kind of like having both, because people always ask me like, why aren't you doing private practice full time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is not for everybody, right? It is for
Yeah.
lots of bodies, but it's not for everybody. And some people never want to do this side.
Sure.
They're like, I already work. Why would I work and then work again? I've heard somebody say like, I'm working and that you're working and you're working again. And I was like, that is true. This one looks a lot different and feels a lot different than this one, even though I like them both. Anyway, just there's a combination for you, right? And some
Yeah.
of that is, like you said, getting curious. Some of that is being okay with failing. Some of that is letting go of this perceived notion that like, I might be the only one. Like most likely, there's a lot of people like you that are feeling
Yeah.
the same way as you, right? I spend
Agreed.
a lot of time in therapy normalizing for people what they think they're the only ones. I'm the
Yeah.
only one. And it's like, you're the only one, but I've been doing this for 16 years and everybody who sits on my couch says the same thing. So you're like the only one in a sea of 1,000 only ones, right? And people are a little bit shocked when I like help them to see that. Shocked in that like they've spent so much time thinking they're isolated.
Yes.
And also shocked that like you're telling me there's a whole bunch of people that feel like me. And I'm like, yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love everything you just said. And the reason I do is because it's my story.
Yeah.
And so I love this both and thinking as opposed to either or. The hard part about it is exactly what you said. A lot of people don't want to have 2 full-time jobs, or they're already a parent, they're a husband, a mother,
They
have
church
kids, they
calling
have
or a
church, they
volunteer, a
have so
coach.
many other things that there's no room to fit anything else in. And so one thing I talk about in my coaching with engineers is it's hard to do, but to slow down and to prioritize things. We have to prioritize our priorities,
Yes.
right? And there's the difference between what's important and what's urgent. And especially in engineering, it probably happens in other fields as well, but we tend to gravitate toward what feels urgent to get the email sent, the project done under budget, within the deadline. Somebody comes and asks us something. There's always something, a phone
Whatever's
call,
on fire.
whatever, put out the fire, right?
Covey squares would say quadrant 1, urgent and important, right?
Yeah. The hard thing is when there's always a fire.
Yeah.
There's always a fire. And that's within your job, that's with your kids, that's whatever. And so what we have to do is prioritize things that are important. We say things like our physical health is important, but oftentimes
Important,
that
but
doesn't
not
feel urgent because we can always do it tomorrow, right? And the biggest lie in the world is I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so
until you can't actually because you're not healthy
exactly
enough or you're not,
and
until
so
it becomes urgent.
there's certain things in your life that you just have to make a priority, and those are the important things, the things we all agree are important but don't feel as urgent. And one of those things that I talk about in my coaching with engineers is to do exactly what you just said, to do both and so my example is I scaled back my engineering. Just 2 months ago, I was working 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, typical workload. And I said, I've been coaching for a year, but it's been on top of my full-time job and I haven't gotten it to where I want to be.
Right.
So how do I do that without working 2 40-hour-a-week jobs?
Yes.
And so I switched jobs. I went back to a firm I worked for in Fresno, California that I left 3 years ago. And I called them and I said, hey, can I work for you, but 4 days a week? Because I want to do these other things. And they're not competitive to what you do, but in my view, they're complementary.
Yes.
Right. And I was fully transparent with that. And so I went back and I started working with them just 2 months ago. I loved the job I had here in Salt Lake. Again, it was more of a it's me, not you kind of situation. But I just didn't have that opportunity.
Which we love. I want to pause and say,
I love too, by the way.
We love and want to say in the belonging place that the best gift you give yourself and give others is to find the place that fits the best for you.
Exactly.
Then you can give to your family, to people. We're going to talk about one of the things that you, in addition, are able to give because you chose you first, right? This is the thing about putting your mask on and filling your bucket first. People have a hard time with this concept because it does mean stop and evaluate, which a lot of people feel like they just don't even have time to do that, right? It's like taking time away from maybe your personal life to help figure out, is is this working for me?
Mm-hmm.
Is there another way that
Mm-hmm.
we can pay the bills that I don't feel like I can't ever show up at home?
Yeah.
Can I take the situation that I have? Do I need to pivot? Do I need to look at it? Sometimes we're such on the grind, we don't even ask those questions. And I think the happiest people, not only do they ask the questions and they get curious, but they do what you just talked about. You just say like, okay, what sacrifices do I need to make where in order for the bigger picture to make sense
Exactly.
and to work for me? And I would say us, if you have a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
That works better for us, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Uh, a friend, I guess I can say friend of mine. We were talking about Mitch earlier, Mitch
Oh yeah,
Whiting,
yeah, yeah.
and
Mitch is great.
Richie Norton out of Hawaii. He came up with this anti-time management plan and just different
One of
things.
my favorite books in the world, by the
Yeah.
way. I did
Okay.
coaching with him as well. They did like a group coaching
Oh,
thing
good.
last
Yeah.
year. Fantastic.
And I have like, I love the concept and also have a hard time as an executive function
Sure.
person who's helping people figure out how to do their day like in blocks of time.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
they are getting late to things, whatever. I'm trying to figure out how to like, because their concept is basically make your life work and then your job make your job work your life.
Yeah.
Right? In essence.
Yeah.
Or make your things work your life.
Richie
Don't
calls
make
it build the castle and then the moat, right?
There you go.
Yeah, I love
Which
it.
I love.
Yeah.
And for most people, that is a very hard concept. It's
It
a
is
very
hard.
industry busting like belief. Now, it does change your way that you are able to give back, the way that you're able to give to yourself, to your family, to your you know, if spirituality to build the
Sure.
kingdom. But this concept that
Mhm.
you're kind of talking about starts with, is it working?
Yeah.
And just because I have money to pay the bills
Uh-huh.
and just because doesn't mean that it's working. If I'm exhausted and I can't contribute in other ways, or I don't feel purposeful, or I don't feel passionate, and I know some people are like, you don't have to be passionate about it. I don't mean that you have to be passionate about your job,
Mhm.
but are you doing something else that you're passionate about?
Yeah.
Or are you just filling your life with a bunch of things that have to be done? I
Sure.
have to work to pay the bills. I have to take care of my kids. I love my kids, but like I only see them between the hours of this and this. And so I'm only doing bedtime routine, or I'm
Yep.
only doing, or I have to do my church calling because this is the thing that they asked me to do. I didn't ask, I got voluntold. And you sort of are at the beck and whim and call of everybody else, right? Versus flipping the script and saying, okay, I'm going to show up for me.
Yeah.
And if I show up for me, I can be a better partner. I can be a better parent. I can be a better employee, right?
Yeah, my cup was full. And so
Yes.
there was no pivot, there was no change, there was no anything, because it was like, well, I'm going to add something on. And I think people feel that way where you're like, you're telling me to do more?
Yes.
And we have to slow down. And by slow down, I mean like do less, but better.
Take some things off the plate
So
you can
do the important things, right? Do less, better, right? And
don't work
so
harder, smarter.
it's not lazy. It's more intentional, right? There's an intentionality to it. And it's uncomfortable because it's not this linear thing. Like just going to work for 40 hours a week, coming home, doing the bedtime routine, those kinds of things. You get in this, what I call like a deadly routine. You're not miserable, but you're just kind of like a
Not
ghost.
Thriving.
You're just kind of coasting, right?
Yeah,
You're not thriving.
You're definitely
And
not flourishing is this word that we talk about.
So a lot of engineers feel that way. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And similar to me, they just don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to speak up. They don't know who to talk to. They feel like they're isolated. They're the only ones. And so I had these grandiose ideas of like, well, let's just see what people think, you know, and the conference worked out. The article in the magazine worked out. Warm reception to coaching, not by everybody, but enough people that it's like, hey, I like this. I keep doing it.
And you do want to coach the people who want to be coached.
Yeah, exactly.
Ideally, right?
Exactly. And so it's been, like you said, dipping my toe in the water and doing both and kind of figuring out along the way. And surprisingly, it's been like one of the most rewarding and refreshing things for me. So
and why? Like you say that, but why do you like? What if we were to break it down?
Yeah, I just learned this recently. I think I'm kind of connecting the dots, as they say. I've always been naturally curious, and that's been amplified as I got older, but I was missing the generosity part of the equation, where you make something and then you share it with somebody. And so I did that within my family and close friends and things like that. But I'm probably like most people where it's like, why do I want to talk about this online? Like nobody wants to hear this stuff. This is garbage, right? And self-promotion and that kind of thing. And it gets into business a little bit that you just kind of have to do that.
Yeah.
But what you said was exactly right. You have to find the people that you're meant to find, right?
Yeah.
And there's 3 camps. There's people that are going to see what you put out there and don't care and complain and this isn't for me or whatever. There's people that see it and they think, oh, this is great. Good job, whatever. And then there's people that are like, that was meant for me, right? And so I'm looking for those people.
People that are attracted. People come in and out of our lives, I think.
Yeah.
And the more purposeful you can show up, the more you can find those people.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So I was always curious, but I was missing the generosity part. Seth Godin wrote something I read recently that he said, curiosity, generosity, and connection.
Oof.
And he says, those are the foundations of what he calls art.
You're speaking my language.
And art, obviously there's the arts, there's productions and things like this. There's painting, there's singing, there's writing, things that we do.
Yeah.
But there's making a business, there's creating.
I would say entrepreneurship
in general.
Dance.
My wife hates business, like it's cringy for her, but she is a baker, so she'll make food, she'll cook, and she'll share with people. Right, that's a generosity element. She's also a cosmetologist, so we have a room in our basement where she does hair.
Oh, I love that.
And she's created this space that is inviting and warm and whatnot. And you probably have your person you go to for your hair, and they're like a little bit of a therapist for you.
Shout out to Katie.
Hey, there you go.
Katie Claire.
Hey, my wife's name is Katie.
This is my best friend's little sister, and I love her, and
That's
I
awesome.
loved her so much. Talk about if you're good at your trade, but also inviting.
Yeah.
I drove all the way to Logan a couple times.
Oh, that's so awesome.
She's now in Salem.
Okay.
And anybody who wants Katie's information, she's great. Or your Katie,
my wife is Katie.
Yeah,
Katie Kennington. Yeah. So she loves that because she's just a good listener. People tell you the craziest things when they're getting their hair done, like about divorce and other things. It's a little bit gossipy sometimes, but a lot of times it's their own story. And I guess they have nowhere to go and they've got a few hours and they just open up, and she's great at listening. And just being a friend. She's like one of the best friends. And so that's her way of being curious and generous and building connection, right? And so it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. But for me, it's been the coaching, which
and
has
if
been
you
really
can
great.
combine it, if you can get paid to do the thing and also be generative and also be it reminded me, I'm going to just for a second, because I haven't really talked about this that much on my podcast, but here in Utah, so those of you who aren't listening in Utah, about 4 or 5 years ago, so I'm going to incorporate maybe COVID on. I was kind of like most people. Maybe I had a LinkedIn profile because it was just like, this is how you find a job.
Sure, it's a resume.
And then something really magical started happening. Started happening on LinkedIn. Sure. And it was wild. For those people who have just in the last few years joined, you wouldn't have seen the before and after. But for those of us who's a lot of people in the Silicon Slopes, some movers and shakers, it was wild. It went from being a tool, and again, I can only speak about, I would specifically say the Silicon Slopes. So like Utah County, Salt Lake County, right? Because I don't know how it looks in other parts of LinkedIn world. I don't, because I'm sort of ensconced in that. But it went from being a place where you say, like, where people are selling, they're pitching their jobs or they're pitching their product, and people are trying to find jobs. And it was pretty static this way. And then people just started to do this and they were just like, I'm done. I'm done with I'm going to talk about my family. And by the way, I'm going to talk about some coaching that I do on the side, or coaching that I'm receiving, or let's talk about mental health. This was a big part of it. Let's talk about mental health. Let's do some, this is where I joined in because there was a bunch of tech companies that would host conversations or, day-long people talking and coming and conferences about mental health. But nobody was talking. They weren't going to this meeting or this lunch, brunch, or whatever we were calling them. There was a million names for them to talk about their job. Maybe as a result of networking and coming together, did you find people? And yes, they did, right? And people are not dumb. And so they utilize those networkings for good. But it was wild. When you do something as an industry that busts what it is, there's a ton of people that are just like, this is not what LinkedIn's for. Don't write about your family, and don't write about suicide, and don't write about mental health. And why are you talking to me? Why are you coaching me? I didn't ask to be coached, because people were just putting out free coaching information. Sure. And my mind was like, everybody better just are you taking screenshots? This is free therapy and free life coaching, right? My
Yeah.
brain was exploding because I was like, people are writing more than they've ever written.
It's crazy.
Their secret sauce. They
I
are
know.
putting it down on paper. They're numbering it 1 to 10, and it hasn't stopped, right? We're 5
No.
years in, and more people, and I love it. And
Yeah.
and I don't hear anymore. Maybe they just get blocked, or maybe we've just blocked them out, like almost on a basketball. Like, we've like I don't really see anybody anymore complaining. It's just like, this is what's become the new normal of LinkedIn. It's like, yes, you can talk about your business, but like, we're not all that interested in your business anymore. We're interested in the Nate Randalls of the world who give their space for single parents who are looking for jobs. Oh, we love Gab. I mean, I have a love affair with Gab. But when I get on and Nate gets on, he's not talking about Gab that much. When they have a new watch or the new, he's of course giving it to people for free, or giving it to them, or saying, do you have a single parent who has kids? And this is how he's promoting it. And we couldn't love Nate Randall more because of it, right? Like, we just want to be a part of the Gab community because of who he is and because of his platform. And I think that we're getting it. I think we're getting in the world. I mean, coming back to this idea that you just said about being generous, being curious. I say generative, like you give, and you give permission for other people to give. And this creates connection. Fortunately, connection can turn into dollars, because we can't do this if it doesn't create sales, and it doesn't whatever, but it does, right? Like, we can see by the numbers that the more people who love your brand, the more people who love you, the more people are going to buy your products. And it used to just be the better the product was, the better it would sell, right? And I think we have both. I'm grateful, but I don't know, thoughts about that?
I love that you identified that flip, and it's interesting that was the case, that there was all these naysayers of like, what are you doing on here? This is for business. And and it was kind of this weird space that, like, of all the social media, was very professional driven. And so I understand that, but over time you just realize that, like, we don't have to have these hard lines. It's a little more blurred than we think. And we appreciate people showing up as their authentic and real self. You mentioned Richie Norton, which he's like one of my heroes. Like, honestly, one of my biggest heroes. Coached with him. I hired him as a coach for a bit with Mitch Whiting. Richie talks about how money and meaning don't have to be either or, and that they can be synonymous, that you can have money and meaning. It gets a little tricky sometimes when you blur those lines, though, because people don't know, are you coming after my money? Are you trying to connect with me? What does this look like? But I think the people that do it right, they're just showing up as themselves. They're offering value. There's extreme value on LinkedIn, like you said, for free. People give away all this stuff for free. And then you're like, how do they even make money? I don't know. And they get creative, and they do it in other ways.
Well,
right?
They give enough that people are curious, and people want more.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And this is generative.
Yes.
Like, if you're not giving anything, how do I find, and I'm always amazed at people that are consistently showing up and giving good thought. There are a lot of people financially who can't afford a coach. They're expensive, right? For the nature of, they're going to give you their secret sauce.
Yeah.
And so you need to pay for it. So for the people who can't, like, I think there's a space for everybody in that, right? This generosity, to me, I think the more people make, if they have a good heart, so that's a big part, the more generous they want to be.
Sure.
Because now they don't have to spend as much time doing the thing. They've built the product. They've made the train, which I say all the time. If they can create a way for people to get that also in their lives, if they've offloaded that to some kind of something, right? They have coaches underneath them, whatever. Now I have more time. Now I can give more. This is the model we hope we have, right?
Yeah.
It's not just to make money to make money. It's to make money to get time.
Yeah.
In essence, we want our freedom, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, we want our freedom back. We want our freedom in our relationships. We want our freedom in our jobs. We want our freedom in money. And the best way we can do that, I think, is, I'm going to come back to what you said, is that being curious, being generous, being connected.
Yeah. I love that.
So speaking of generosity and like writing, and you're getting creative, and you're thinking, how can I give back? There's this other area.
Yeah.
Talk to me how, if you're not a natural born writer, but you're journaling and you're thinking about ideas and you're liking it, how do you jump, or what jumps you to, like, I'm going to write a kid's book?
So, this is, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'll show this to camera. This is my book I wrote. If you're thinking about getting writing, write a children's book. It's only 500 words or less, right? It's real easy, but
write an artist, it sounds like.
Oh my gosh, It was so wonderful. So the long story is that I wrote this in 2014.
Okay.
So it's been a bit. It was my dipping my toe in the pool, right? The proverbial water of the pool.
I'm gonna try it out.
And I'm going to try it out. And I wrote it. I didn't know what I was doing. And that's what stops most people. It's like, who am I? What do I know? I could list out 1,000 questions. How long does a book need to be? Like, what makes a good book? Who's going to draw it? Like, who manufactures books? I don't even know. Like, how do I get it into somebody's hands? What do I sell it for? Like, there were so many questions. And at some point, you just have to ignore the questions and
do the thing.
Take one step and answer the first one, right? Like, well, what is it going to be about? And the reason I wrote it is because I wanted to teach my son something that I thought was important. So the message of the book is to embrace change, and you'll find happiness in unexpected places. Yeah. And so the book,
underlying principle being building resilience, which, by the way, I'm obsessed with.
Oh, me too. Me too. Okay. Especially as a parent, you're
like,
oh, I need to be better at this, but I want my kids.
Things. You have to do hard things.
And so the story is about my wife and I when we went from not having any children to having children. And I actually wrote it before we had our first son. So it was a little bit of me projecting what I thought that life was going to be like. You don't know until you actually go through something, but we knew it was going to turn our world upside down. So I wanted to write a book about that experience for my wife and my son. But I wanted to make it more playful and engaging. And so it's from the perspective of our dog. His name is Thomas. He's a little brown hound. And so the book's called The Difficult Life of a Little Brown Hound. So he loved our life before our son was born. It was just, we took him on a walk every day. He hung out with us on the couch. Like, he was our fur baby, right? Like people say.
Yes, of course.
And then we had a son, and he kind of got the boot, right? And so less walks, less attention. And it was hard for him, at least in the story it was, right? Yeah. And then eventually they become best friends. Yeah. And so it's this idea that, like, even though we go through something hard, there might be something to learn there. And it might be one of our biggest blessings, right? Our biggest growths that we can have. And so I wrote that. I hired my brother-in-law. He's an artist, but he's not a children's book illustrator. He does something called still life, which is, you take a picture of like a teacup and some flowers, and then you paint that, and it goes very old school. But he doesn't do this, but he was nice enough to have me pay him a couple $100 and draw the book. Turned out phenomenal. Gave it to my wife in 2014 for Christmas. She cried, right? It was great. It was everything we wanted. We kept it on the shelf. We read it to our kids. 9 or 10 years, almost 10 years go by. And again, going back to this, I was curious, and I took the steps, and I was generous in the sense that I shared it with my family, but it kind of stopped there. Yeah. And 9 or 10 years later, I was like, man, we need to share this with more people. Like, I need to get over my own ego and stop being worried about what people are going to think. And this is a great book, but it wasn't polished enough for the general public. And so if you've ever done a creative project, there's kind of these phases or versions or drafts. It was good, but it wasn't good enough. And so I had to hire this awesome illustrator, Sita Koskin. And that was just a feat in and of itself. Where do you find an illustrator? Yes. What style goes with your story?
This also stops people.
Work out?
I don't know what I don't know.
I don't know what I don't know.
And I guess I want to say in this process, we have never before lived in a world more connected in I don't know what I don't know.
I know.
I mean, even 10 years ago, if I was doing this, I would just be like, we have the internet. Now I'm saying we have AI.
It's a weird paradox,
robots
right?
That tell you
it's
who
a weird
is
paradox.
Writing. Yeah.
We bought into this. I don't know what I don't know, but yet the tools are like right
and part
there.
Part of me says I'm not pro robot. I'm not anti robot. But I'm pro creativity.
Sure.
And in the world in the future, and I guess I'm making my claim right here today that as we get closer to, I don't know if we're going Jetsons or if we're going apocalyptic. There's two choices in our world, right? I think figure out how you can live in both worlds, but either world that I'm in, I want to live in a world where creativity exists,
100%.
right? And so for me, the places I can meet the bots of the world is this.
Yeah.
When you don't know how, I started a nonprofit. I do not have an MBA. I started it 13 years ago with my best friend. And I don't know how to do that. No. But guess what? You can go and you can say, how do I start a 501c3? And the world will conspire for your good on the internet. Now there's good sources and better sources and bad sources, right? But we started it and we created it and we got our 501c3 status and we're 13 years in. And I am grateful back then that I never thought like, who am I to start it? We had a need that we wanted to do. We wanted to take teens and do international travel and service. We wanted to start this choir of people who had graduated from college and high school but still wanted to sing. We had these things that we wanted to do that we were good at, but not necessarily the business. It's harder because now I know how hard it is when I look back to start now. There's something about being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Yeah.
But I guess I want to say to people in this process where like I had to find an artist that like never have we ever made it easier for people to connect to other people. So utilize what you don't know rather than not doing the thing, right?
Yeah, this girl lives in Turkey. She barely speaks English. Like she spoke well enough to work with me and whatnot. And we connected on a platform called Behance, which is for artists. But then we immediately jumped to Instagram and we just chatted. We did the whole business through Instagram messages, right?
Yes. Okay, so you found the need to fill the hole of the thing.
And it just worked out. And what you said is awesome because that was the most fulfilling part of this whole thing was not that I created something. It's that I architected something, that I was kind of the guy, and it's not a control thing. It's not that I want to be the name on the front page or anything like that. But there's this muscle that we don't use oftentimes in our typical careers and typical roles where we just kind of show up and get told what to do.
Yeah, the captain of my ship.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we don't always need to be the captain, but we need to be the captain sometimes. You use the term building the train, right? Which I love. I've heard that on several episodes already. We don't always need to build the train.
Yeah, sometimes we just ride the train.
Sometimes we just ride the train, but we always need to be trying to build something because that's how we help other people and that's how we create value.
And that's how we find ourselves.
And that's how you find yourselves.
In the
There's so much
thing.
growth in there, right? And so the fact that I was able to take on the role of, yes, I wrote a few hundred words and that took time and effort and I figured that out and I did a lot of other things.
You built a concept.
Yes. But I found her, my brother did a lot of the formatting and stuff with us. And so you make this team and they learned things and they benefited. And then we were able as a team to kind of give that to the world. And so I tell everybody they need to do that on some level, even if it's not a business or a book or whatever it may be, if it's baking cookies like my wife and sharing it with somebody or doing hair or whatever it might be, that there's some sort of curiosity combined with generosity that you can create something and share it with other people.
I love that. And I also, thank you, Jake. And I also want to say you can stop the train at any point because I do think that there have been people in my life when I started my private practice, it was very small and I'm an adolescent therapist and there's a huge need and I don't take insurance and I'm private pay and there was never not people. I've never really gone anywhere and said I'm looking for clients because I had a small private practice. But there was always, if you do something good, I think there's word of mouth, right? So there's always people. And there have been times when I'm taking no clients. There's times that I'm taking a client. And I've had people in my life kind of curious because I charge more and make more in my private practice, right? I mean, I charge what is the worth of what my years of experience. But what I'm saying is people are kind of like, why aren't you always full? Or why don't you take on more? There's this concept that once something's good and once something is making you money and once something is benefiting other people, you kind of can't stop the train. And I just want to say, I'm a huge fan of people building a train. Sometimes you're even building it while you're riding it. Yeah. Not always ideal, but that's what I think entrepreneurship is in general. You're building the train while you're riding it, while you're driving it. You can't always build it and then get on it, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to say in a world, just this is for maybe a small demographic that are listening to this. At any point when you've built the train, you can stop the train.
Yeah.
And you can stop it for times and seasons. And you can start it again. You can deconstruct it and rebuild it. Like this is the crazy thing about being the author of your story or being the captain of your ship or being able to say like, I want to do this, is that you can also choose, is it benefiting me like when I started?
Yeah.
And is it giving back? You know, when I started, there's been times with my mental health or my whatever I'm doing that I've had to say, like, I would actually rather ride the train of the stability of my job that just every day than the work that it takes to show up creatively.
Yeah.
And there's been other times that I'm like, oh, this train has been going and it's really good, and I need to jump the track and go over here for a little bit, and I need to be more generative, and I need to be more creative, and I need to add, or I need to or I'm deciding that I'm going to take this thing off my plate so I can add this thing. That's another thing I think not enough of us do. We just add.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I stopping
I know
to add this thing? You did the book. It's been, you said,
so I wrote
10
it,
years?
10 years ago, and then we just self-published it through Amazon. It was never for sale anywhere, but we did that
It's on Amazon
last
now.
year. Now it's on Amazon, and it's been great. It's been fun sharing it with people. It's not this blockbuster hit. We're not Ryan Holiday selling millions of copies of books.
Many people are. Can we be honest?
Oh yeah, in my research,
are.
I'm like, there's different numbers out there, but most books they get published sell in their lifetime like 1,000 copies or something. It's very low,
if they
right?
never sell, like the first purpose you had. I guess I also want to blow in. If you just build it or write it or create it for you and your family and your progeny, it's enough.
Yeah,
it's better than that you didn't do anything.
Yeah,
right?
The way I look at it is it's an offering.
Yes.
Like at some point you do it for you and you're happy with what the outcome was. But when you turn it over to the public or your family or your spouse or whatever, like you can't force them to want it or like it or buy it, right?
Yeah.
You can influence that sometimes, but really it's an offering. It's like, here you go, world. Like, see what you want, you know?
Yeah, it's a synergy.
Take it for what it is.
If you and I are friends, there's this third thing that comes out of your and my friendship, right? And it's this combination of our skills and our backgrounds and our beliefs. True. It's the same thing with an offering. You write a book, you write it for your son, you write it for your wife, you give it to your family, then you put it out in the world. There's a synergy thing that happens because then another family who's having the baby for the first time is using that story in their lives, and it becomes its own. It's less about you and more about the story, but it's generating an ability to talk about change for other people that maybe they didn't have the words or the time or the whatever, right?
Yeah.
I love this. So, and you want to write more?
So,
you've written more, maybe.
Well, this leads into what I wanted to say something about stopping the train or that idea. And I love it. The way I approached this book and all my creative things that I work on is I think of them in terms of projects. And this comes from Richie Norton. If you've read his book, Anti-Time Management, which you kind of mentioned, he talks about this process or this kind of framework called the 4 Ps. And they're the 4 kind of priorities or purposes. And I'm going to get this right: personal, people, play, and professional. And so his whole thing is like, project. You build a project in each one of those areas. You find out what's the most important thing, because we all have 20 million things we could do in all of those categories. But if we're not focused on one, we ultimately don't really do a whole lot.
It's a diffused responsibility.
Yeah, just like little baby things happen, but they never really take off. And so he's like, focus on the 4 most important things, and focus on those things with a deadline, and a project can succeed or fail.
Such a project management style.
It is. But for me, what it helped me do was, instead of sitting here going, well, if I write a book, I have to be a writer, and how many more am I going to write? And it just feels like this big commitment. It feels like a huge burden. And if you just look at it as like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do one, and you're fully committed to it. But it could work, it could not. And if you want to pull out, you can, or at least finish the task and then go, that wasn't for me, And so
I learned a lot, but not for me.
That was my thing. I was going to write one book, I didn't know how many kids we were going to have. I didn't know what it was going to look like. But I've committed to do 3 more. So that's my next project, because we have 4 kids.
Yeah.
And my other kids are like, Dad, where's my book? Because this was written for my son, Harvey. And so Nash is 8. He just turned 8. He's getting baptized in a couple of weeks, which is awesome. But he's like, Dad, where's my book? And it's unique because I haven't written a book in 10 years. And I know this kid, at least in his 8 years of being here. So now I can craft this message for him that's very personal, right? This is
personal,
great.
probably, and also universal, though.
And universal, right. For sure. This message, even though I didn't know my son at the time because he wasn't born, ironically hits home. Like this book was meant for him, right? To embrace change. He has a hard time with that, and as we all do, right?
Yes.
And so the next book, my son Nash, let's see, I have so many ideas floating around. My style of writing is based on actual events. And so obviously this was about our son and our dog and whatnot. And so when I was younger, I grew up in California. It was really hot. spent most of my summers swimming at my cousin's house. And so we would do flips and gainers and different things. And so I just wrote about this in my newsletter about how we learned how to do those things because they were a little scary. And so I'm going to write, my son also likes to swim and he's a little bit athletic and he likes doing flips on the trampoline and stuff like that. So I'm going to use that story, kind of insert him and talk about building confidence is kind of the main thread there, building confidence in ourselves through experience.
Yeah.
And then also taking the leap. You can only have so much confidence in yourself. At some point, there's a leap you have to take. You to go to the next level, right? Where it's uncertain and it's scary, and that could be internal or external fears. And so it's this big idea, but it's going to be boiled down to like a children's book.
And again, ultimately building resilience,
yes,
right? You have to
exactly.
kind of like, everyone can think about the first time, well, they did a backflip or they were learning how to read.
Sure.
Or for people who did music, like the first time you went from like the concepts to like actually being able to read music, right?
I know, it's crazy.
It's hard to remember some of those things. Like I think most people can't remember when they clicked from like learning the alphabet to reading because you were young.
Yeah.
But some of these things like in sports or in music, even if you're older, like I remember exactly when it went from music was so hard for me to like, oh, I can read almost anything you put in front of me. It's magical. It's like a magic thing, right?
It's gradual, but
this,
one day.
The backflip, the flip off the thing, I love this idea, this concept. It's a little bit scary, but building confidence is such a building block for the future, right? Because you're basically saying, in order to know and grow, you have to fail sometimes, or you have to accept that you might fail. Then you'll succeed. But like, I love this so much. And I love that you're doing it, like personally and generally, I'm guessing, who knows, and that you've kind of decided what a fun thing between you as a father and your kids.
Oh, it's so fun. Yeah. I'm so excited. And the fact that they're older. So we have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, that'll be the next book. And then we have a almost 4-year-old girl. And then a 2-year-old girl. And so I have a little bit of time because I do want them to be kind of younger children's books that are just fun. Anyone that has kids knows that you have to tell your kids things a million times.
Mom,
exactly.
Dad.
And it's not even kids, it's humans, like in one ear out the other, right? So this was my way of like teaching at least some simple, fundamental, important lessons to my kids that we could repeat over and over and over again, and that hopefully as adults they can kind of take that resilience like you're talking about and just important lessons that I think are important. I will say these messages are also for me. They're therapeutic for me, like embrace change as an engineer. I'm like, man, I better embrace some change. Like it was very foreboding of what was to come, you know, but it's been a great experience. So
one of the things, if people have been listening to my podcast now, we're like 26 episodes in, one of the things that I'm going to call it out now, but I've just been doing kind of organically is I like to sort of take the concept and the things. I like to do this little zoom out, like if we had a drone. The thing that I want to reflect back to you, maybe you've thought about this already, Jake, maybe you haven't, but one thing I want to gift back to you about this that you just described, you sat here and you talked about all the things that you learned and all the things that your kids are learning from the book. And I want to pull back one more layer and say, one of the things, what do you think are some of the things you are modeling to your kids by doing this process? So not the thing, but not the actual outcome of the book, but what do you think you are showing them or presenting with them or modeling to them while you're doing it?
There's probably a million things I could say, but that's been one of the coolest parts about it is, I mentioned engineering, that I can go and show my kids a building or whatever, but they don't get to see the whole process. If they do, they just don't understand it or it's boring. I'm like, look at my computer screen and the calculations I'm doing. And they're just like, okay, Dad, whatever, And so they see the final version of the building.
The arrival.
And they see
none
the
of the becoming.
100%. You use this terminology. I love it. They see the arrival and none of the becoming. And so what I'm trying to do with all of my creative endeavors and projects that I do, whether it's writing books or coaching or whatever it may be, is I try to involve my kids in the process. So I'm going to go speak at another conference in Arizona in June. And I told my kids, I'm like, you're coming with me. At least my 2 oldest kids. They might be bored out of their minds sitting there listening to me speak or whatever, but we're going to spend 10 hours in the car driving there, talking with each other, talking about what we're doing, why we're there, other things as well. They get to see dad in action, right? Which just, it didn't really happen in the engineering space. And so I'm super grateful that
Less
I get
about
to,
what you say, I just want to say, and
Yeah.
more about that you got up on the stage and did it.
yeah,
What a model.
exactly. True. Yeah.
I mean, yes, if they love what you say, but I would consider part of parent or leadership modeling is so little about what people say.
Exactly.
And so much about how people feel
Yeah.
and what they are showing. Like
Exactly.
the feeling of taking the trip, the feeling of being in the car, the feeling of like being proud that their dad's up on stage. Maybe they get it, maybe they don't, what you're talking about. But what you've modeled for them is that it will become normal for them. It's you're normalizing to them in their lives as they get older that like people can stand on stage and talk at things. If that wasn't normalized for you, if that was a big pivot, it's like, oh, I could potentially, at 30, I could potentially speak at a conference, like Nash is going to know that at 8.
I know.
Right?
You nailed it on the head. I'm trying to involve them as much as possible in the process, not the arriving, so that they can see what's possible. Because when you see it, it's much easier to just go do it because you normalize it, right?
Permission giving. It just like opens this is what we talk about when we when we crash glass ceilings, or when we like do a thing that you're not supposed to be. I'll never forget that in a community that I was speaking at. This was in a small town in St. John's. Shout out to St. John's, Arizona, where my family has a homestead, and my when I say family, I mean generational family. And I was speaking to this group. It was young women and their mothers. And for the most part, this group had sort of a belief system that you had to have a lot of money to travel. This was just the common belief that a lot of still people have, right?
Sure.
And I was coming and talking about other things, but one of the things I wanted to break for them in that whole room, I wanted to just like give permission at this young age. I wanted to say like, I did a little breakdown exercise where I was like, if you have a part-time job, how much money would it take you to get $1,500 is what I said. And they had to do the math. Like maybe they had to work 6 months, maybe they, whatever. I also said to moms, like, how much would you have to pull out of your mom's budget? How long would it take you to put aside? And it was wild. There was anything from like 6 weeks to like 3 months. And I said, what if I were to tell you that that's the cost of a ticket to get to Ghana, Africa?
Oh, yeah.
It changed it, right?
Made
like
it possible.
If I put my pennies and I aside, like costs nothing to be there. So it's just basically the cost to get there. It, like the actual look on their faces. There's something that when we live or show or model or permission give to people, it changes something really fundamentally in their brain. This idea that I thought that I had to have so much money, or I can't go travel until I'm a 40-year-old adult because I have to do college and I have to do, that like you can put your pennies wherever you want them. And if you want to put them in education and then you can't travel while you're in education, fine. But when you're done with education, you have pennies you put for education that can go somewhere else if you don't spend them on frivolous things. And so you can put your money where your mouth is, right? But there's something I just love that you're modeling for your kids, lots of things. And one of the things you're modeling is earlier for them is the thing that you found by being curious about yourself, right? If I can do this, and I can also show my kids early, they can do this and now maybe they want to go and do the thing that's just like the straightforward thing, and that's fine, right? Maybe they want to do the not straightforward thing at all, the total entrepreneurial, like that's scary too, right?
Sure.
But that's fine. Like you're giving them sort of you're gifting them your curiosity back, right?
Yeah. So my son, Harvey, the one that's 10 that I wrote this book for, last year, he was 8, 9, whatever he was, 9. He's a kid that went through speech therapy.
Okay.
He didn't speak till much older. He struggled with words. He doesn't love English. He's kind of like me. He goes towards the math and that kind of thing. And so talking about modeling and involving our children, what we're doing, he at school wrote his own book.
I love it.
I know. I loved it too. And like you said, I'm not doing these things to push my kids into what I do or what I love, but the whole idea is to model what's possible and to show them like the backstory of everything, right? Get them involved in like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And you can use the same process to figure out what you want to do. But as a kid, you kind of gravitate towards what dad does, right? A lot of times. And so he didn't do it as an assignment at school. He wasn't asked to do it. He doesn't write ever. He did it like on the back of his notebook, and it was more words than I put in this book.
Okay.
And I was like, this is awesome. He loves animals. He called it Going to the Zoo. And he started typing it up. And so you talk about kind of this influence that we have and this modeling that we're doing.
Falls out, right?
It just falls out.
If you're
like
doing
that wasn't the intention,
Yes.
right? But it happened. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So now I'm like sold. I'm like, we're writing more books. We're doing more coaching. Like I'm working for myself because I get to involve my kids in the process. And that's what I love.
Yeah. And I want to say generally to people, like why I wanted to pull that back is the gift you give generatively to those around you, to your relationships, to your colleagues, is the more you get curious about yourself and your purpose in life and sort of what like you can do that no one else can do, or that you can do that everyone can do, but you're actually doing it.
Yeah.
You just put one foot in front. I say this a lot on my podcast. Sterling Sill has a line in his book on leadership that says most ideas die en route. I read that and that has transformed me
1000%.
fundamentally as a person. I will not be that person.
Yeah.
Like when I die, no one is ever going to say that I died with a whole bunch of ideas in my head.
Yeah.
Like that just won't be my legacy.
That resonates
My
with
legacy
me.
will be a lot of good, a lot of failure with some good.
Yes.
And nobody's really going to talk. I hope nobody really talks about all my failures when I die, but they know it because I didn't hide it, and because I've been messy, and because I have ADHD, and because I have decided to take the good with the bad. Yeah. I've decided to help myself with my executive function deficits, get better at them. But there is this idea that the better you are at you, the better you can give.
I love that.
Right? And the better and curious you get about things or how to do them, or start. Blake Mykowski has a book called Start Something That Matters. Yeah. He's the Tom's guy, right? This is a book. This is an old book. I also refer to this because he basically says, don't just start anything. There's lots of people but start something that matters. But I think that the idea is if it matters to you, it matters. Yeah. And then do it, right? Just do it. You don't have to have all the pieces, and you get better at it. You can look back on it. You can make adjustments to it. There's something that is permission giving to everybody along the way. I always talk about trains, like nobody wants to build it, but everyone wants to ride it. But so be a train builder or be a train rider. But what I'm starting to realize that I don't talk enough about is how many people are building tracks and trains alongside, right? Yeah. They're not joining my train, but because they can see me building a train, or you writing a book, or I've had guests, do other things. They then say, well, I could probably do that in their own world, in their own thing. I have a friend of mine who started doing cookie designing, and I mean, to the degree that it was so good, and like she just couldn't keep up with it and didn't want to make it a business, so she's still doing it. But I was like, look at what you did. You started a little bakery in your home and have just like brought joy to like so many people's special moments in their lives, because she specifically did like birthdays and baby blessings and and she started just because she liked to cook. And I said, and your baking, you just liking to bake, has now shown up because I've bought her cookies and given them to people for special occasions multiple times, has become the marking of some people's most important moments. And you just thought, I like to make cookies, right?
I know, right?
This is the thing that we're kind of selling to people, right? The idea that like, get curious, get generous, slow down, like be able to look around at your life. Let's let go of things that aren't serving us very well. Maybe we can pick those up later. Let's pick up things that do. Let's start things, even if we don't know how to do them. And then let's share what we have, right? Anything else about that?
Yeah. I think this stems from our early days of math, maybe geometry or something. So the nerdy side of me, but we learned that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Yeah. The problem is, in real life, the shortest distance between where we are and where we want to go is never a straight line. Like you just said, it's a zig and a zag and a back and a forward and a left and a right and a do-si-do and a hula, and all sorts of stuff. And that's okay. We didn't talk about, over the last couple of years, all the things I tried that failed. Like I was a book writing coach for a little bit. That failed horribly. So many things we could talk about. Just for time's sake, we're kind of hitting some of the highlights, but the whole this idea of arriving, for me, success, if I had to define it, it can't be a destination. It cannot be a destination, because otherwise you get there and you're done, you know? So success has to be a direction.
Yeah.
And you can change the direction, right? You're allowed to do that, and it's a choice, right? And so zig and zag all you want. The point is just to keep taking a step forward and working on whatever it is that you want to work on with the intent to help other people as well.
I do think you called it maybe manifesting earlier. I do think, and this is something I believe in because this is something I've been a product of and recipient of, is that when you can put some goals out there or ideas out there and then you speak them out. Yeah. Because that's the second step that most people don't do. No one can conspire for your good if they don't know what you want,
that's
right?
True. That's
when
true.
You say to people, I think I want to speak at that. Yeah. Like I'm going to go back to that.
I told a room of 60 coworkers, I got up on a Monday morning meeting and I'm like, I have a goal. Like not only do I want to, but it's my goal. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'm going to speak at that.
And then what did you do to make it happen?
Well, everybody goes, what are you going to speak about? And I'm like, I freaking know. I was like, I don't know, but probably nothing technical. And they're like, oh, okay. And so that story's kind of funny. Somebody said, I know a guy, like in the group. They're like, I know a guy. And
of course
I'm like,
it is.
Oh, you know
somebody
a guy?
You know who knows somebody.
Somebody in the office was on the committee of you know what I mean? And I'm like, what? How did I not know this? And so talking about manifesting or speaking up or putting it out into the universe is like, oftentimes you don't make those connections until you take that step into the dark a little bit. Same thing with the book. When I was looking for Sita, I thought, I know nobody in this space. I know nobody that writes or makes books or does children's books. Yeah. Within a week, I found out my wife has a cousin that owns a children's book publishing company. And so I reached out to him just to get advice. And he's like, go on Behance. And so it's this left, then right, then zig, then zag. And then I eventually found her, right? But if I didn't put it out there like, hey, I want to write this book. Hey, I want to speak at this conference. You're never going to make the connections that you need to make.
Yeah. And I want to share a quick story I haven't shared.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear, this is like, I've never shared in any of my podcasts I've been on or even been like a guest of. Years ago, I've always wanted to have a piano because I'm a piano player. And years ago when I was living in Arizona, I was going to grad school. A couple roommates and we decided that we had been like sneaking into the church and playing the piano and different things like that just to like assuage the need, right?
Sure.
It just wasn't enough. We wanted to have music nights and stuff. And so we were sort of talking about renting a piano, which I never thought about doing in my life. But I was like, this is a gap, right? You rent houses before you buy houses. Anyway, we were talking and one of my really close friends at the time heard us talking about wanting to have a piano. And he'd heard us talking about renting, but mostly just like the need to want to have a piano. And also I had written in my book, Make It Happen, one of my 5 big life goals is to have a piano. And so I'd put it out in places. So he had read the book, but he had also heard me. And in his life, it just so happened to be that his grandma had passed and his mom and his aunt were trying to figure out what to do with this baby grand that they had. It's a Wurlitzer, 1901. It's an old, beautiful baby grand. And nobody in their family, thank goodness for me, necessarily wanted it or could play it. It had been sitting sort of like a piece of furniture, which is the saddest thing for any musician when people use their baby grands or grands as like furniture. That had been sitting as kind of a piece of furniture. And so he said to his mom, like, I think I know somebody who could really benefit from having this piano. And of course, I never thought I would get a baby grand at that point in my life. I always thought it was going to be when I was like past being married and kids, because like who can afford that, you know? And we had an adoption party, like a baby adoption party, a baby grand adoption party. And I had brought a bunch of friends to play, and my best friend's like mom and aunt just cried the whole time because that is their mother's piano that was like re-brought to life, right? So we I took really care. I oiled her up and took really care of her. Got her tuned and everything. And that, anyway, my piano's name is Ella May, which is their mom's name, grandma's name. It was named after her. But every time I see Ella May in my house, I think I would never have this piano if I had not said, this is a goal of mine, or said out loud to people like, hey, should we rent a piano? Because my friend would have never known. Somebody else would have gotten that piano. I can't, like when people say, what's your most thing? I cannot pick my piano up and take it out of my house. But if I could, that's the one thing I would take out of my house today, right? Like it is the most sentimental value and it was never mine. It was gifted. I have adopted it, but it is like transcendentally in me and visually for me that says like, we have to help each other. We have to conspire for people's good, right? We have to, when people now ask me when recently when a friend got laid off and I was like, get on LinkedIn. And then they're like, why? I was like, because people want to conspire for your good. They want to get you a job, true. Right? Yeah. Tell people what you need because otherwise they cannot conspire for your good, right? Sure. Thank you for letting me tell you about
I love
LMA.
That story. That's
and thank
so
you
good.
for telling about yours.
LMA, I love that.
Well, the last question I usually ask people, Jake, is kind of a culmination question. But as you've been thinking about coming on this podcast, and knowing it's about belonging and kind of your story, is there anything that you want to share about what you feel about connection and belonging or how that has impacted your life or kind of just how you would define that?
How do you define belonging? Again, so open-ended and great. I've thought about it a little bit since I knew I was coming on. I think we talked about speaking a language, right? Speaking somebody's language earlier. That could be quite literally the language that they speak. Serving my mission in South America, learning a new language, like you almost don't get accepted or understood, or you can't connect until you can understand what they're saying. And so there's literal language barriers sometimes, but also just a language in the sense of like who you are. And I think the best way for me to describe belonging, or the way that I see it, is being understood and seen. I know that's kind of cliche and generic, but I'll give a good example. This last firm I worked for in Salt Lake, Reevely Engineers, they're fantastic. I can't say enough good things about them. It was a bittersweet day to leave there and move on to something else. I had great friends, and they're a great group of individuals. And I do believe, we say this thing, actions speak louder than words. I think actions are important, but I think something better than actions are actions and words.
Yeah.
And so I give my 2 weeks notice at this firm. I say, hey, I'm leaving. These are the reasons why I need to scale back, all the things that we talked about. And they're gracious enough to say, well, we're rooting for you. This is great. Like, wish you stayed, but we understand, kind of thing. And in that 2 week period where I was kind of handing off some projects and getting ready to leave, 4, 5, 6 people came by, and these are kind of senior level people that I know fairly well. Some I've been able to work on projects with deeply, some more at a surface level, but they come by and they say something to the effect of, hey, we're going to miss you, and we'll leave the door open and we'll leave a light on.
Oof.
And the boss, the president of the company, came by, and I don't say this to make myself sound good, but I share it because it illustrates the importance of words and actions. And he came by and he said, we're going to miss you, and you're one of the best people we've ever hired. And I was like, oh, man. And so the reason that hit home is because he acted in a way for the last 2.5 years that those words meant something. Like, I knew that he meant it. They weren't just words.
Yeah.
And so it's this combination
Platitudes.
of, it wasn't just like, we'll miss you, see you later.
Awesome.
Like, it was like, man, I really felt understood and seen in that moment. And so my only 2 cents or my perspective on belonging is that, yes, keep putting in the work, keep doing the actions, but don't forget about the words, right? Words matter.
I'm a words of affirmation person.
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like I could survive on words. I can't pay my bills on words, but yes. So I live what you're saying. I think we need kind of a theme of this podcast, right? This and that.
Mm-hmm.
Like we definitely need both.
Yeah.
I love that they said the door's open and the lights on.
Yeah.
I think that's
cool.
the greatest praise you could get from some place. If they really do feel like they're sad to leave, they would be happy to have you back, right?
Yeah.
That says a lot about who you are, Jake, and the type of work that you contributed. Thank you so much for coming and talking.
Thanks for having me.
We're gonna have your links below, but people can
great.
buy your book
Yeah.
on Amazon,
Sure.
right? And you have a website, I believe.
Yeah.
And and tell us what that is.
So yeah, my coaching is you'll love this, humanengineercoach.com. And so I'm embracing the human side or the people side of things. And so if anybody's interested, they could look there, and then LinkedIn. It's just
we have your LinkedIn below, and people will be able to connect with you there, and you put out some really good stuff. And then is your newsletter a public newsletter, or is it a coaching newsletter?
It's interesting. So like you said, I positioned my coaching very purposefully to be for engineers and engineering leaders, because I speak their language.
Yeah.
Like I get them. I've heard from so many engineers that have hired coaches, but they weren't engineers, and they just kind of missed the mark because they don't get how they think. And so the way online I've kind of positioned my business is I'm a coach for engineers and engineering leaders. The irony of that is I don't talk about anything engineering.
Yeah, of course.
You speak the language. It's all about personal development. It's all about building yourself and working on yourself, and some of the things that we've been talking about with creativity and curiosity and generosity and all that stuff. So if anybody that's kind of more technically minded, maybe not an engineer, it would be a great fit as well. You can go to humanengineercoach.com and sign up, subscribe for that. If you're like a completely, which one's the left and right brain? I can't remember. Left is the engineer, right? If you're more of a right brain creative type person, I think you would still get value from it, but I get it if that's not your cup
but
of tea,
specifically, we want to send engineers of the world out there that want more. Like you said earlier, I kind of just wanted more, but I couldn't even point to what that was. You're doing well and want more for either coaching or your newsletter or just for your content. I mean, that we got connected through, I think probably here, Brotherhood, which is men's mental health. I think that's probably where I started seeing you, because I'm on the advisory board there, but also LinkedIn, right?
I saw you on LinkedIn. I saw the podcast. You never know what the algo's
telling
you.
You never know.
You're like, and then occasionally you're like, let's check this out.
Yeah.
And I was like fascinated. Like, I love what you're doing, and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, we appreciate you. So you guys check out things from Jake Kennington, and thanks, Jake.
Thank you. Appreciate it.